Adesso a una seconda, diciamo, fase che è quella relativa a come si è arrivati alla direttiva. Facciamo un passo un po' indietro rispetto all'approvazione definitiva con una parentesi, diciamo, europea. Valentina,
Allora, grazie.
collega, grazie.
Allora, sono a corto di parole, quindi sarò molto molto breve. No, come diceva giustamente Francesca, la direttiva ha una sua genesi nel tempo, che ovviamente noi vediamo nel prodotto finito, quindi nel momento in cui viene deliberata e arriva poi a cascata sugli Stati membri, ma c'è tutto un percorso che prevede anche il coinvolgimento delle parti sociali, ovviamente, e che ha, diciamo, nel tempo poi portato a un dibattito all'interno del movimento sindacale europeo, ma anche all'interno del mondo della rappresentanza delle imprese a livello europeo, che si è confrontato insieme alle istituzioni nel portare la direttiva. Io penso sia importante da questo punto di vista fare un passo indietro, quindi sulla discussione che c'è stata, che ha portato a questo punto di equilibrio nella direttiva e a quelle che sono le aspettative anche del sindacato europeo rispetto alle implicazioni che potrà avere in futuro. Vi presento con piacere Judith Kirton-Darling, che è la segretaria generale di IndustriAll Europe. IndustriAll Europe è il sindacato europeo dell'industria, alla quale la FIM, la FIOM e la WILM sono affiliati e che rappresenta le lavoratrici e lavoratori metalmeccanici, chimici, tessili dell'industria europea, e elemento importante da dire oggi è anche la prima segretaria generale di una federazione così importante in Europa. Quindi prego Judith.
Thanks very much. So first of all, I will just check how the interpretation is going to work, so that to make sure that everybody can understand me. The first thing I would like to say is a big thank you for the invitation to speak today and to be part of this meeting. As I said in the meeting last year on violence of this committee, this working group in the metal sector is really groundbreaking in our view across Europe, and has led some really innovative discussions about how collective bargaining can push forward gender equality. So when we received the invitation, obviously we were as an office, we were delighted to participate, and we hope that the discussions that you have between unions and employers will lead to another groundbreaking collective agreement. So we wish you all the good luck in the process from now on. It's also really symbolic to be talking about this in Rome, because as Sylvia said, I hope I can call you Sylvia, but as Sylvia said, this principle of equal pay between men and women is a founding principle of the European project, and it is right in the middle of the Treaty of Rome, which founded the European Union as we know today. So also, if innovation came from discussions in Rome, this is a nice building on the treaty. But as was said, the principle of equal pay, although it's been developed over many years, decades, through different pieces of legislation on discrimination, through case law in national courts, in the European court, at every point there are a number of barriers which women face in really implementing their basic freedoms that are stated in law. Not all of those obstacles are related to transparency. It's important to also say that there are legal obstacles which and social obstacles, if you like, in achieving gender pay, which also have to be taken into account, whether it's intimidation in bringing cases, whether it's pressure on women in accepting poorer standards and poorer terms and conditions, or whether it's other provisions in legislation, limitations on the time that cases can be brought, and so on. So there are other obstacles which which face, but the fundamental obstacle in achieving gender equality and gender equal pay is lack of transparency. And in some ways, there are also legal provisions in different countries which are intended to block that transparency. We see in some employment contracts clauses which ban workers talking to other workers about their salaries and their terms and conditions, so-called pay secrecy clauses. This has been one of the top targets of the European trade union movement for a long time, because we know that in order to really build a transparency framework and as you said, Sylvia, to basically have an operationalization of this principle of equal pay, you need to deal with these very pernicious legal provisions in employment contracts, but also in the national legal system. So as trade unions, we've campaigned on equal pay for decades. It's part of our raison d'etre, if you like. To give a bit of a background, not to go back to 1957, but to fast forward, if you like, to 2019. In 2019, we had the European elections. The European elections created a very different situation in the European Parliament, where the balance of power in the European Parliament was far more balanced than previously. And the candidate for the Commission President had to win a majority of votes in the European Parliament to be elected. And the first time that Ursula von der Leyen went for the votes, it was extremely tight. Now, that created a leverage around the Commission programme for this Commission, which has meant that a significant number of priorities from the trade union movement found their way into the Commission programme. If we think about the European Minimum Wage Directive, which has also been adopted, we think about legislation on human rights due diligence, which is currently being finalised. This Commission has brought forward a number of trade union priorities because of the balance that was created by the European elections in 2019. In 2019, the European Trade Union Confederation made pay transparency one of its top priorities. And they said that this had to be part of the programme of the new Commission, alongside another piece of legislation on equality, women on boards and board level female representation. Both these pieces of legislation have come out of the Commission in this period, and both of them have now been finalised before the next European elections. But that very quick summary hides a very big political fight, because it was part of the Commission's programme. We were told that it would come in the first 100 days of the new Commission. But we had to run a campaign across Brussels, at national level, across national trade union movements, to fight for this directive on pay transparency to be published in the first place by the Commission. That campaign involved, at one stage, a little bit surreally, the European trade union movement putting posters around the Commission headquarters that you see in cities and towns across Europe of the missing cat. We said, we're missing the Pay Transparency Directive. Has anybody seen it? Can you help us find it in order that it would be published? There was a lot of campaigning to try and get the directive to leave the doors of the European Commission and to be put on the table of the European Parliament and the Member States. So and then when it came out to the European Commission, we then had another battle because with all diplomacy and recognition of how fantastic it is to be in a meeting of the trade union movement and employers talking about the implementation of the directive. We have faced some very big battles with European employers around this legislation, including in the metal sector, where our European Metal Employer Organisation has seen this piece of legislation as one of the biggest mistakes that Europe has made in the last 5 years, according to some of the events that they've organised in the last few weeks ahead of the next European elections. So this was a very bitter battle to try and get this legislation out into the open and then to get it through the legal process on the other side. I don't want to take too long, but there are a number of elements which have been touched on, but we see as really important in the legislation. The first is that there is now a ban on these pay secrecy clauses in employment contracts. This is already one of the core trade union demands. There is an explicit promotion of collective bargaining in the directive and the promotion of collective agreements to go to implement and to go beyond the provisions of the directive. I think this is a real lever for you as a committee to think about how through the metal negotiations, the provisions of the directive could be given more life, more content in terms of the sectors that we represent. The point which Silvia made about ensuring comparisons are possible is really critical. During the campaign to get the directive, in order to show why it's so important, even in industries which are perhaps have relatively better employment terms and conditions than some of the very female-dominated industries and service sectors in our economy. We provided a series of pieces of research for the European Trade Union Confederation during the campaign around the gender pay gap within the metal sector. We used established data from Germany and Romania to show that in female-dominated parts of the metal sector, particularly the white goods industry, domestic appliances sector, which traditionally is a more female-dominated part of metal manufacturing. If you compare the white goods sector with the automotive industry, which is traditionally a male-dominated part of the metal manufacturing sector, then the pay difference for exactly the same job in terms of skills, in terms of effort, in terms of tenure, in terms of the fourth criteria I'm now losing, but these 4 criteria which are included inside the directive, the pay difference was about 1,000 euros in a country like Germany. In Romania, it was 1,300 euros, the difference between the pay between these two sectors. So this notion of allowing the comparison of pay levels collectively between sectors which are primarily female dominated and sectors which are primarily male dominated on the basis of gender neutral criteria for pay qualification is really critical in ensuring comparisons. And another element in terms of the comparison which is very important is that you can compare a real male worker in terms of the real pay that a male worker receives for the same job, but the directive also provides for the creation of hypothetical comparisons as well, which is a way of ensuring there's an approach to the gender pay gap, which is actually putting the best practices elsewhere in the world into European legislation, because where we see some of the most groundbreaking pay equality legislation is in Ontario, in Canada, in New Zealand, where these notions of hypothetical comparators have been integrated and developed to ensure that we can find ways to really look at some of those hidden levels of discrimination, as was said. In terms of trade unions and the role of workers' representatives, this was a very big battle in the process through the European Parliament and the Council. It's a battle which is ongoing in lots of European legislation, where notions of worker representative are sometimes used in a way which can be interpreted to mean somebody appointed by the management could be defined as the worker representative. In the final text of the directive, it relates to national law and practice, but that still leaves an ambiguity. So in the transposition of the legislation in Italy, it will be very important to watch how this is transposed to ensure that its shop stewards have the right rights, and that we don't see a kind of diversion into a different approach which would undermine established industrial relations, established social dialogue. And then that can be built on through that provision related to collective bargaining. The directive covers all workers, a very broad definition, but it's worth knowing that one of the other big fights was on how much reporting has to be done in a mandatory way. So I heard the reference to the 2021 legislation, which talks about reporting every 2 years. Well, the directive maybe improves that, especially for the big companies. If there are more than 250 employees, companies are obliged to report every year on these on the pay equality. You then have a sliding scale from 250 to 100. You can report, I think, every 3 years. The difficulty is for very small companies, and we know the European economy is mostly made up of small and medium-sized enterprises. Companies under 100.
Per favore, dovete chiudere l'audio da remoto, per favore.
Io ce l'ho chiuso.
Qualcuno ha l'audio da remoto acceso, ma noi non riusciamo a bloccarlo dalla sala, quindi per cortesia controllatevi gli audio.
It's okay? Okay. Okay, so for companies under 100 workers, there's no mandatory obligation in terms of the reporting, but where there is an opening is that can be decided at the national level. And there can be special support for small companies to ensure that they also extend the protections of the directive to their workforce. So there potentially as well, there's an area where there's scope for you to think innovatively about how to deal with smaller companies in the medical sector, and also in the transposition to try and ensure the widest coverage of the legislation as a whole. The last point that I would just draw out as an innovation in the directive is that much of European equality legislation has been basically a silo approach. We deal with discrimination on the basis of gender. We deal with discrimination on the basis of race, discrimination on the basis of disability. This is the first directive that talks about intersectionality. It's still very vague, but it's the first legal reference. So you could start to think about what are the gender pay implications for is there a discrimination on the basis of being a woman, but also disabled, or also from a different ethnic minority, migrant worker. This allows a more nuanced approach, a more realistic, if you like, approach to discrimination, because it's very rare that it's only because it's a woman that discrimination happens. It's more often that it's a combination of different characteristics. So just to kind of wrap up, the campaign from the European trade union movement now is to say, why wait? We all know what the legislation says. We all have it in front of us. We have, in legal terms, 3 years to transpose the legislation and then to implement it. But in those 3 years, women are losing pay. And the European Trade Union Institute has produced a set of data showing how much money women workers in different countries on average will lose as a result of a slow transposition. It goes from more than 30,000 euros for workers in Germany, Austria, and elsewhere. For Italy, it's about 6,000 euros. The difference of waiting 3 years for the transposition or finding a quicker way to transpose the legislation into national law. And in the current context in Europe, where we have big skills shortages, especially in our sectors, we have a big transition question about how we're attracting people into manufacturing. And in all of our industries, whether it's the metal industries, the chemical industries, paper, aerospace, automotive, textiles, right across industrial Europe, the number one issue for most of our employer counterparts is the attractiveness of the industries and how to deal with these skill shortages and labour shortages. Well, one way of dealing with labour shortages and improving the attractiveness of the industries is demonstrating the fairness of the terms and conditions for men and women in the industry, creating more female-friendly working organisations, creating more female-friendly manufacturing sites. And pay is a crucial part of that attractiveness. Is absolutely vital, and therefore we think there's also a self-interest from employers to also accelerate this process of pushing this forward, because this would send such a positive message to women at different stages of their professional career, at the beginning, entering into industry, but also women who are already active in the labour market. And crucially, those women who have found that they don't stay. They might enter into manufacturing, but then they don't stay in manufacturing. They leave when they have children. They leave as a result of care obligations. This is about sending a really strong signal that manufacturing industries, STEM industries, are a place for women at every stage of their professional and personal lives. So we're really hopeful that as a result of your discussions and negotiations, we hope that the discussions will go into some negotiations, that not only will you be groundbreaking when it comes to violence against women and collective bargaining on violence against women, but you'll also be groundbreaking when it comes to these questions, fundamental questions of equal pay, transparency and fair treatment in the workplace. Thank you very much.
Grazie mille Judith. Volevo soltanto dire che sfortunatamente chi si trova a casa non ha avuto accesso alla traduzione, quindi per coloro che non parlassero inglese magari provvederemo a dare, diciamo, un riassunto in italiano dell'intervento di Judith, ma tecnicamente non era sostenibile, ammesso che non avessimo insomma raddoppiato i tempi, altrimenti darvi anche la traduzione in contemporanea online.